All right, this is a very short part of the presentation. The ascension is something that's really important, and if you don't know what the word ascend means, it means to go up. And so the doctrine of the ascension basically is that after 40 days of meeting with his disciples after his resurrection, Jesus ascended into heaven. And so I'm going to ask you to pause the show and to read Acts 6, chapter 6, verses 1 to 11, just to get an idea of that. And so after reading that, you have to ask yourself, what is heaven? Where is heaven? And you might want to read Revelation 4 1 to 11 because that gives a little glimpse of what happens in heaven. It's just incredible worship where all creation in very weird, that is represented by weird creatures, is worshiping God rightly. So I think that when we say that Jesus ascended into heaven, we need to have a proper understanding of what heaven is. And one of my favorite authors, his name is Tom Wright, he described heaven as a place where God's will is done perfectly. Our desire is that God's will be done on earth. That's God's desire, and that He wants to work with us to see that that happens. Another question that we need to ask is, where is heaven? I forget the name of the astronaut who went up there and basically said, "Well, heaven's not up here. I can't see God anywhere," and as if that were evidence that God didn't exist. But heaven, instead of saying where it is, like it is a location, is it up on the clouds or the Care Bears? Where is heaven has to do with the kind of quality. So heaven is where God's will is done perfectly. Heaven is the control room for the entire universe. So the doctrine of the ascension is really important because Jesus ascended as in a human body into God's control room, and there it is described. He's described as having a role as a high priest, and he's interceding on our behalf every day. He's interceding that God's will be done. This is something that we've lost in the church. We used to think that God had a mission, and that was the church. But God has a mission in the world, and He has a church in the world to fulfill that mission. It's not about us; it's about us doing God's will, and that's found in the Lord's Prayer. This is something we all need to memorize. It's our Father who art in heaven, who is in that perfect place. Your name is holy. And then we ask Him that His kingdom will come, that His will be done on earth just like heaven. That's our heart's desire, is to see that God's will is done. Okay, and this has to do with the reign of Christ. So in Mark 16:19, it says, "When the Lord Jesus had finished talking with them, He was taken up to heaven and sat down in the place of honor at God's right hand." That means God's right hand means that in a place of authority. So Jesus taught he was the descendant of King David, and he was said that he'd be a king for all time, but not an earthly king, but a heavenly king who would establish God's will here on earth. And that's our job as Christians, is to see that is done, that His will is done. So I'm going to ask you to read Philippians 2. Oh, that's actually wrong. If you read chapter 1 in Philippians, I think it talks about how Jesus descended. He set aside His glory and became a servant. And in the same way, we are to serve others, and in so doing, we honor and glorify Christ. So the ascension has to do with the establishment of Jesus' reign as king over the earth. And we are His servants to see that takes place. All right, hope to see you next week.